The last time anyone saw Emily Carter, she was walking home from school on a crisp autumn afternoon. The 15-year-old had taken the same route every day, a quiet suburban street lined with golden-leaved trees. But on October 12, 2004, Emily never made it home. Her disappearance shattered the sleepy town of Willow Creek. Search parties combed the woods, detectives interrogated neighbors, and the news cycle fed on theories, none of which led to any real answers. Emily was gone, vanished without a trace. Her parents, Mark and Linda Carter, refused to give up hope. Every year on the anniversary of her disappearance, they held a vigil, lighting candles and pleading for information. But as years passed, hope turned to grief, then to acceptance. By the 20th anniversary, even the police had long moved on. Then, on October 12, 2024, something chilling happened. A single letter arrived at the Carter household. The envelope was yellowed, as if aged over time. No return address, just their names scrawled in shaky, almost frantic handwriting. Linda's hands trembled as she opened it. Mark hovered over her shoulder, his breath held. The letter inside was brief, just 3 haunting sentences. She never left Willow Creek. She's been waiting for you to find her. Time is running out. A shiver crawled up Linda's spine. Mark grabbed the letter, examining it. This has to be a cruel joke. But Linda wasn't so sure. The handwriting seemed familiar. Something about the way the letters curled, the jagged strokes. It sparked a memory, just out of reach. Determined, they took the letter to the police. Detective Ryan Mitchell, who had taken over old cases, frowned as he read it. "We've seen hoaxes before," he said. "But this feels different." The Carters weren't the only ones who thought so. Across town, Jenny Lawson, Emily's childhood best friend, received an identical letter. So did James Holloway, the man who had been the prime suspect years ago but was never charged due to lack of evidence. 3 letters, 3 people, 1 message. That night, as the autumn wind howled outside, Linda sat at the kitchen table, staring at the letter. Then she flipped it over and gasped. Faintly embossed on the back was something she hadn't noticed before. A symbol, a small, eerie mark that looked like an eye, surrounded by jagged lines. Her blood ran cold. She had seen this symbol before, etched into the old tree behind their house, the one Emily used to carve her initials into. Mark followed her panicked gaze. "Linda, what is it?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "I think Emily left us a clue," before she disappeared. Linda ran out into the cold night, her robe billowing behind her as she reached the backyard. The old oak tree stood tall, its bark worn and weathered. She traced her fingers along the surface, searching for the carving she remembered from so long ago. And then she found it. There, beneath the rough bark, were Emily's initials, EC. But beneath them, barely visible under 2 decades of growth, was the same I symbol from the letter. Linda's breath hitched. She called for Mark, who arrived seconds later, flashlight in hand. "It's here," she whispered, pointing to the carving. Mark shone the light over it, revealing something else. Something that hadn't been there before. A fresh scratch in the wood, deep and precise. A single arrow pointing downward. Mark knelt and started digging at the base of the tree with his hands, pushing aside damp leaves and cold earth. Linda helped, her fingers growing numb. Then suddenly, Mark hit something hard. He exchanged a nervous glance with Linda before pulling out a small, rusted tin box. With shaking hands, he pried it open. Inside, there was a single folded note. Linda unfolded it slowly, her pulse hammering. "If you found this, you're getting close. Don't trust them. Find the house where the light never goes out." A gust of wind howled through the trees, making the branches groan. Mark stood abruptly, scanning the yard as if expecting someone, or something, to emerge from the shadows. "The house where the light never goes out," Linda murmured. "What does that mean?" Mark's expression darkened. "I think I know." Linda turned to him, her eyes wide. "Where?" Mark hesitated before answering. "There's an old house on the outskirts of town. It belonged to the Holloway family." Jenny Lawson's voice echoed in Linda's head. "James Holloway got a letter too." Mark clenched his jaw. James always claimed he had nothing to do with Emily's disappearance. But what if? A rustling noise cut him off. Both Linda and Mark froze. The sound was coming from the trees behind their house. Then a shadow moved. Someone was watching them. Linda's heart pounded. Mark grabbed her arm. "Inside. Now." They sprinted toward the house, slamming the door behind them. Mark locked it, his breath ragged. Linda peeked through the curtains, but the shadowy figure was gone. Gone, but not far. Somewhere in the darkness, someone was waiting, and they weren't done playing this game. Linda's fingers trembled as she locked the door. Mark peered out the window, scanning the backyard. The shadowy figure was gone. But they both knew it wasn't over. Mark turned to Linda. "We need to find that house." Linda hesitated. "James Holloway, he was a suspect, Mark. If we go to his family's house, we might be walking straight into danger." Mark exhaled sharply. "And if Emily is still out there, somewhere, then we have to take that risk." A heavy silence settled between them before Linda nodded. "Let's go." They grabbed their coats and a flashlight before slipping out the back door. The wind was biting, sending dead leaves swirling around their feet as they made their way to the car. Mark drove in tense silence, the headlights slicing through the night. The Holloway house sat on the outskirts of Willow Creek, a crumbling Victorian mansion that had been abandoned for years. Its history was tainted. James Holloway's father, Richard, had been a reclusive man, rumored to be involved in sinister dealings. After James was questioned in Emily's disappearance, the family vanished, leaving the house to decay. As they approached, the sight of the house made Linda's stomach twist. It was massive, its once grand facade now covered in ivy and rot. But one detail sent a chill down her spine. A single window on the second floor was lit. "The house where the light never goes out," Linda whispered. Mark killed the engine. They sat in the eerie silence, staring at the glowing window. "Someone's inside," he muttered. "But who?" Linda's breath hitched as a shadow passed behind the curtain. "We need to be careful," Mark said, stepping out of the car. They approached cautiously, the leaves crunching beneath their feet. The porch creaked as Mark tested the front door. It swung open with a groan. Inside, the air was thick with dust and decay. The wallpaper had peeled away in strips, exposing the rotting wood beneath. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the faint scent of mold lingered in the air. Then, a noise, soft, deliberate footsteps from upstairs. Linda's heart pounded. Mark tightened his grip on the flashlight, angling the beam toward the staircase. "Someone's up there." Linda's fingers brushed against something on a nearby table. A small, dusty picture frame. She wiped it clean and gasped. It was Emily. The photo showed her at 15, sitting on a wooden swing in a familiar backyard. Their backyard. And beside her, smiling, was James Holloway. Mark stared at the image. Why is this here? A creak from the staircase snapped them back to the present. A figure stood at the top. Linda sucked in a breath. It was a man, tall, gaunt, his face hidden in the shadows. Then he spoke. "You shouldn't have come here." Mark raised the flashlight, the beam illuminating the man's face. James Holloway. He looked older, his face hollowed by time. But his eyes were sharp, alert. and filled with something Linda couldn't place. Fear? What are you doing here? Mark demanded. James ignored the question, his gaze fixed on the letter in Linda's hand. You got one too. Linda swallowed. Who sent them, James? His expression darkened. She did. Mark stiffened. Emily? James nodded slowly. She's been trying to reach you. Linda's throat tightened. James, is Emily alive? James hesitated. Not in the way you think. A loud thump echoed from above. James flinched, his eyes darting toward the ceiling. It's not safe here, he whispered. They're watching. Mark stepped forward. Who's watching? James hesitated, then turned, motioning for them to follow. They climbed the stairs, the wood groaning beneath their weight. James led them down a dark hallway, stopping in front of a door. He pushed it open, revealing a small room. Inside, newspapers covered the walls, articles about Emily's disappearance, police reports, surveillance photos. But one thing stood out among them. A single handwritten note pinned to the wall. They took me. I never left. Find the truth before it's too late. Linda's knees nearly gave out. Oh my God. James's voice was barely audible. She left that for me years ago. Mark turned to him. Who took her? James swallowed hard. I don't know, but I think... He hesitated. I think Emily was onto something. Something dangerous. A sharp bang from downstairs made them all jump. Linda's breath hitched. Someone else was in the house. James grabbed a knife from a nearby dresser. We have to go. Now. Linda and Mark followed as James led them through a back staircase, descending into darkness. As they reached the back door, James hesitated. They won't let us leave so easily. Mark clenched his fists. Who are they? James exhaled shakily. The people who've been covering this up. Linda's blood ran cold. You mean, Emily didn't just vanish? James shook his head. She was taken. Before Linda could respond, the back door burst open. A figure stood silhouetted against the night. Then, everything went black. Detective Harris sat at his desk, the dim glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across his cluttered office. The letter haunted him. You left me behind. Now it's my turn to disappear. It had been postmarked from a small town 2 states away, a place called Millwood. Harris knew he couldn't ignore this lead. He had to go there. By the time he arrived in Millwood, night had settled in, and the town had an eerie stillness to it. He checked into a modest motel, tossing his bag on the bed before pulling out the letter again. There was something about the handwriting that nagged at him, but he couldn't place it. The next morning, Harris headed to the local police station. The sheriff, a burly man named Tom Grayson, greeted him with wary eyes. We don't get many visitors from the city around here. What brings you? Harris slid the letter across the desk. I believe this is connected to a missing person case I worked on 20 years ago. A girl named Emily Carter. Sheriff Grayson's face darkened. He pushed his chair back, rubbing his chin. Emily Carter. I remember that name. A body was found in the woods about a decade ago. We never identified her, but some folks thought it might have been her. Harris felt his stomach tighten. Where was she found? About 10 miles from here, near an old farmhouse. No one lives there anymore, but locals say strange things happen around that place. Some claim they see lights flickering in the windows at night, though the house has been abandoned for years. Harris wasted no time. He drove out to the farmhouse, the tires of his rental crunching against the gravel road. The house stood like a skeleton against the gray sky, its windows dark and lifeless. He approached cautiously, pushing open the creaking front door. Inside, dust blanketed the furniture, but something was off. Footprints in the dust. Someone had been here recently. As he moved deeper into the house, a sound made him freeze. A whisper. Harris spun around, his heart pounding. "Hello!" Silence. Then, another whisper, this time from upstairs. He took slow, measured steps up the staircase, his hand hovering over his holster. At the top of the stairs, a door stood ajar. He nudged it open with his foot, revealing a small room with nothing but a single chair in the center. On the chair sat a dusty teddy bear, and beneath it another letter. Harris swallowed hard as he unfolded the note. "You're getting closer, but so am I." A chill ran down his spine. Someone was watching him. As he turned to leave, a floorboard creaked downstairs. Someone else was in the house. He drew his gun, moving cautiously back down the stairs. A shadow flickered in his peripheral vision. Harris pivoted, ready to fire, but the shadow was gone. Instead, he saw a figure standing at the front door. A woman with long dark hair, her face obscured by the dim light. "Emily?" he whispered. The woman turned and bolted into the woods. Harris ran after her, his breath coming in ragged gasps as he pursued her through the dense trees. "Stop! I just want to talk." She didn't stop. Then suddenly she vanished. He stopped, scanning the area, but she was gone. No footprints, no rustling bushes. Nothing. Harris pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking as he dialed Sheriff Grayson. "I saw someone at the farmhouse. A woman. I think it was Emily." The sheriff sighed on the other end. "You're not the first person to say that." Harris frowned. "What do you mean?" Grayson hesitated. "Over the years, people have claimed to see a woman matching Emily's description near that house. But she always disappears. Like a ghost." Harris tightened his grip on the phone. "She's not a ghost. Someone is playing games. And I intend to find out who." As he turned to leave, his foot hit something solid in the dirt. He crouched down, brushing away the soil. A small wooden box was buried there. He pried it open, revealing a set of old, yellowed photographs. They were of Emily, and the last one had a date written on the back. Tomorrow's date. A warning or a promise? Before we dive into the next chapter, if you're enjoying this story and don't want to miss out on more gripping mysteries, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell so you're the first to know when a new story drops. Now, let's continue. Harris stared at the photograph in his hands, his pulse hammering against his ribs. The date scrawled on the back, tomorrow's date, felt like a countdown. But to what? A warning? A meeting? Or something much worse? He rushed back to his car, dialing Sheriff Grayson. "We need to talk. Now." Minutes later, Harris sat across from Grayson in the sheriff's cluttered office. He slid the photo across the desk. "I found this buried near the farmhouse. The date on the back is tomorrow. Someone wants me to see this." Grayson's eyes darkened as he studied the image. This was taken before Emily disappeared. "I'd bet my badge on it. But why would someone bury it now?" "That's what I intend to find out. I need everything you have on that farmhouse." Grayson sighed, reaching into a locked cabinet. He pulled out an old file, its edges yellowed with age. "You're not gonna like what you find. That house has a history. Murders, disappearances. Every few years, someone claims to see Emily just like you did. But the strangest part? The people who go looking for answers. They either leave town empty-handed or they vanish, just like she did." Harris clenched his jaw. "Then I guess I better make sure I don't vanish." That night, he returned to the farmhouse, this time with his gun drawn and a flashlight cutting through the thick darkness. The air was heavy, suffocating, as if the house itself was holding its breath. Then he saw it, a figure standing at the top of the stairs. Emily. Her dark eyes locked onto his, filled with something unreadable. Fear, sorrow, or something else entirely. Harris took a step forward, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. "Emily? Is it really you?" She didn't answer. Instead, she turned and disappeared into a room at the end of the hall. He sprinted after her, pushing the door open. Empty. Only a rocking chair swaying gently, as if someone had been sitting there just moments before. Then he noticed it. Another letter, pinned to the wall with a rusted nail. He ripped it down, his eyes scanning the words. "You're almost there, but the truth is buried deeper than you think. Come alone. Midnight. No signature. No explanation. Just a time." Harris exhaled sharply. He had no choice. He had to go. He had to see this through. And so, as the clock struck midnight, he found himself back at the farmhouse, standing in the overgrown field behind it. The night was eerily silent, save for the rustling of leaves in the wind. Then a whisper. "You shouldn't have come." Harris spun around, his flashlight beams slicing through the darkness. But no one was there. Then, suddenly, the ground beneath his feet gave way, sending him plummeting downward into darkness. Darkness swallowed Harris as he hit the ground hard, knocking the wind from his lungs. Dirt crumbled from above, and for a terrifying moment, he thought he was buried alive. But as his eyes adjusted, he realized he had fallen into a hidden underground chamber beneath the farmhouse. His flashlight flickered, illuminating the space. The walls were lined with decayed wooden beams, and in the center of the room stood an old wooden table, covered in dust and scattered with yellowed papers. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic. Blood. Harris gagged as his flashlight landed on a rusted chain hanging from the ceiling. Attached to it was a tattered dress, blue with white polka dots. He knew that dress. It was the same one Emily had been wearing in the last known photograph of her before she vanished. His pulse pounded. "Emily? Are you here?" A faint whisper echoed through the chamber. "You shouldn't have come." He swung the flashlight toward the sound, and there, in the shadows, stood Emily. But something was wrong. Her skin was pale, almost translucent. Her dark hair fell in tangled waves over her shoulders, and her eyes, hollow, haunted, seemed to pierce straight through him. "Emily, I've been looking for you." She shook her head slowly. "You don't understand. It's not safe." Before he could respond, footsteps echoed from above. Someone else was here. A cold shiver ran down Harris's spine as a trapdoor creaked open. A beam of light cut through the darkness, and a familiar voice sent chills through him. "Detective Harris. I told you to leave this alone." "Sheriff Grayson." Harris gritted his teeth. You knew she was down here this whole time." Grayson stepped down cautiously, his gun drawn. "It was never supposed to go this far, but you just wouldn't stop digging. Now I don't have a choice." Emily backed away, fear flashing in her eyes. "He's lying." Harris clenched his fists. "Tell me the truth, Grayson. What really happened 20 years ago?" The sheriff let out a slow breath. Emily wasn't the first, and she wouldn't have been the last. A sick realization settled over Harris. "You took them. All the missing people. Was it you?" Grayson's expression darkened. "Not just me. The whole town knew. We had a secret to keep." Harris's stomach twisted. "A secret? What kind of town lets their people disappear without a word?" Emily stepped forward, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Because they made a deal." Grayson's grip on the gun tightened. "Enough." But Harris wasn't listening anymore. His mind was racing, piecing together every oddity, every unanswered question. The farmhouse, the buried letters, the warnings. This wasn't just about Emily. It was about something much bigger. Then, without warning, Emily lunged at Grayson. A gunshot rang out. For a moment, everything stood still. Then Grayson staggered backward, his gun falling from his grip. Blood seeped through his shirt as he collapsed onto the cold dirt floor, his breath ragged. Emily looked at Harris, her expression unreadable. "It's over." Harris swallowed hard, his heart still hammering in his chest. "We need to get you out of here. We need to tell the world what happened." Emily gave him a sad smile. "You don't understand. I can't leave." Before he could respond, the walls of the chamber began to tremble. Dust rained down from the ceiling as the ground quaked beneath them. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. "It's waking up." Harris grabbed her arm. "What's waking up?" But before she could answer, the floor beneath them split open, swallowing the past, the secrets, and everything they thought they knew.